Hello, wherever you are. This is Lisette from Amsterdam with my friend, my childhood friend, Lucy McCurrer from Norfolk. And we are on the 27th. We turn 27 in our episodes of the year of being 70, all an idea of my friend Lucy.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in our episodes, in our 26 episodes so far. And because today in the UK is the celebration of VE Day, Victory in Europe, and the 80th anniversary. And in Holland, you have something different.
Well, you came to liberate us. So today is Liberation Day. It's actually a holiday. It not so every year, but every 5 years, it's now a holiday. And yesterday was Remembrance Day. So I went to a ceremony around the corner here in the northern part of Amsterdam, where I now live. And it was very, very sweet. It was a bit cold after the warmth of the previous week. But there were about at least 200 people
Wow.
and a lot of young people. And what really was beautiful, there were these young girls who, for a school project, they had spoken to people who were alive during the war. And there's less and less, of course, of them. And one of them had told this girl that he was four when the war started, and that he wasn't so aware of it, but he was aware of the fright and the grief of his parents. And in this part of town were actually was a factory of airplanes, Fokker. And so the Germans, of course, had taken over that factory. And in 1942, the British, came to bomb that factory. But they had covered it and made it look like it was houses where people lived. So, of course, the pilots did not want to bomb civilians. So they were looking, and it was like hazy, they were cloudy, they couldn't see very well. Of course, they did not have at all have the instruments that, pilots now have. And so they released their bombs, and actually one fell on a church. And the other story, there was another girl from another school who'd spoken to a woman who said her brother was in the church because there were children kind of in the church working with the priest. And the bomb fell, and he had said, "Stand in the center, you'll be safe there." And the bomb fell smack in the middle. And her parents had had to identify the boy by his shoes.
Oh, awful.
And so these young girls, 11, 12 years old, read these stories and called themselves hereditary bearers of a heritage of the story. And it was so very, very moving. The
Very
whole
moving.
the whole ceremony was very moving. And then we have silence for 2 minutes. And then we sing our national anthem, and then flowers are being laid on that place. So that was, yeah, Remembrance Day yesterday. And then today is Liberation Day with concerts and free markets. And so all thanks to you and the Canadians and the Americans.
Well, I mean, I feel that we were lucky in the sense that we were on an island and did not get invaded by the German army. I mean, that must have been absolutely terrifying. I mean, we were constantly worried. I mean, I say we, obviously I wasn't there, but we had defenses around the channel, and there was the thought, all the time that we would get invaded. But we luckily never were in that situation.
Invaded or occupied. We were like occupied
Occupied,
territory.
occupied is,
But
yes.
London was bombed relentlessly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, London was bombed, Liverpool was bombed, Coventry. I mean, lots of cities were completely, not completely, but, very largely, huge parts of them were destroyed. And I think that's had an effect on our generation, the rebuilding, the whole shape of urban life in the UK has been very much affected by the bombings. And when I was young, I was aware of, there were still bomb sites quite near. There had been bombs dropped near us in Chelsea. That I remember lots of rebuilding and new houses and a general. I mean, obviously, as a very young child, I wasn't hugely aware of what it meant, but I was aware that from 1955, 6, whenever there had been the war. The war was an important element in the context I was born into.
And where were your parents during the war?
Oh, so I was just talking to my mum about that. So my father would have been in London in the house that we went I was brought up in Chelsea Square, because he worked for the War Office. And he didn't go and fight, but he was working for the war, obviously.
So what year was your father born? How old was
I was
he?
born in 1908. So
Okay, so he was already 32
yeah,
in 1940 when the war really started. He was
yes,
32
exactly.
already. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And my mother was in the country. Her family lived in the country. My grandfather was a major in the Grenadiers, and he had been in the First World War and lost his arm. But he was also in the Second World War. He was in France, and then he was in Scotland, but he was not allowed to say where he was or what he was doing. So my grandmother didn't know where he was for a lot of the war. It was all sort of secret. But he was home, I believe, by VE Day. And so, they all got the news together as a family, but because they were in the middle of the country, there were no kind of massive celebrations, not like you see the footage of Londoners all going out onto the street and celebrating. So
I never realized that our days coincide and that for you it is V-Day and for us it's Liberation Day. It's actually a realization that, of course, for you and the other side, you were victorious. It was like Churchill's V, right? We will never surrender and we will fight on the beaches and we will fight. And you did.
yes, exactly. And that's what we are, that those are the nature of our celebrations today. I mean, we have military parades, we have fly pasts, we have the Red Arrow, planes doing their thing. I imagine there may even be street parties somewhere, sort of a recreation of the celebrations then. So it is all very yes, celebratory, and heroic, I suppose. Um, and, and
Yes. No,
and the media has been, over the weekend, the media has been full of interviews with some of the remaining people who are alive. Amazing 100-year-old woman who was part of Bletchley Park, and the
okay, Bletchley Park. Does everybody know what Bletchley Park is? I've read some novels about Bletchley Park. I love those.
I think
It was
most
the
people.
intelligence,
Yes, it was the intelligence center, and where they uh what was that machine called?
the Enigma.
Enigma, that's right, where they cracked the code and got all that information in, all that secret information from the German communications, and cracked codes
Well,
and
as I understand, every day was a race against the clock because they
yeah,
would kind of catch some information and then have to decode it. And if they weren't on time, the bombs had already been dropped.
yeah,
And so it was, yeah, and there were so many women working then and
yes.
then there. And then after the war, there was no recognition at all of the work they had done, the intelligence work.
No, and they weren't even allowed to talk about it because it was, official secrets. So, it was
Yeah.
much later that they realized what unsung heroes these women, and of course men, were as well. And this 100-year-old woman was so clear, so on the ball. She was funny. She talked about exactly what they'd done, and she said, if they want to call me up now, I'm here, I'm ready.
Well, it's wonderful for you. That you can feel really good about yourself because here it's a very mixed bag. It's a very mixed bag because especially in Amsterdam, of 80,000 Jewish people who lived here, 60,000 were murdered and there was deportation. And there was the transport company that, provided the trams and the buses for people to be transported. And in the beginning, of course, there was not an inkling, there was not a knowing of there's something happening on your screen.
I hope it's okay.
Yeah. Anyway, and the police helped, and others were more heroic. They had people in their homes,
Yes.
and yesterday there was also a movie, a 3-hour movie of all the addresses where either Jewish or Roma or Sinti or anyone who was in any way different, lived, and what happened to them, and also the heroism of people who took, families in, and who took, 10 young men in, or otherwise they would be drafted. And so it's very mixed about who was a hero. There's also, of course, people who are children of collaborators. There was the NSB, was a pro-German, pro-fascist party. And so, yeah, it was very difficult for those children to grow up after the war, knowing that their parents had been, on the wrong side, and it wasn't their
Yeah.
fault, but they were still, of course, carry that weight.
No, that's a very heavy legacy to bear. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, extraordinary heroism from the people, the families who hid Jewish people,
Yeah,
Jewish
yeah, yeah, and
families.
smuggled him away, or
Yeah, built
there was this
walls.
story of this man who forged about 1,000 false Brazilian passports, and he'd never seen a Brazilian passport in his life, but no one else had. So, and those kinds of heroes.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. Yes, and
Yeah.
I suppose on the on the British side, the heroes were the volunteers who worked through the Blitz, drove the women who drove the ambulances, and the men, of course, and rescued people. The people who went down into shelters. I think there are, anyone who was alive in the war recognizes the air raid
Yeah.
siren with absolute fear. My mother still says she was in France. Her family were in France at the start of the war. And my grandmother thought that it was safer to stay in France rather than to go back to England. That was a massive misjudgment on her part. But, as they realized that the German army was getting closer and closer, they were in northern France on the coast. That it became very frightening, and my mum can still kind of use, if she really needs to do something urgently, she can still, if she says to herself the Germans are coming, that instills absolute kind of can't make a noise, must be silent, sort of kind of fear.
Yeah.
And but eventually my my grandfather's mother, my great grandmother, got hold of my grandfather, who was in fact in France too, and he got them to a boat, and they came home on a ferry
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
England, and but because otherwise that they would have been who knows what part of the
Yeah, but it just goes to show that, yesterday in that memorial kind of ceremony, it's also like peace is fragile.
yeah, yeah,
And we have no idea what can happen and how it can happen, and we underestimate maybe. And there's also articles in the newspapers that say, are we still in peace?
yeah,
Or we're
yeah.
not in peace any longer. We're not in war, but we're not in peace any longer,
No,
which
no,
is
exactly.
so
And the
different.
speed that things can happen,
Yeah.
suddenly it goes slowly, 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 and then fast, very
Yeah.
fast, and then it's too late.
Yeah.
And that kind of appeasement, yeah, that worries me about what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. Appeasement
Yeah,
seems
of
like the
course.
right, gentle way to go, but it can
Yeah.
absolutely not be. And
Yeah.
I also do feel that because the actual people who lived through the war and their real life experience is now disappearing from our world, that it's kind of lost to. I mean, I think we still feel it. Our generation probably still feels it, but people who come after us, the younger ones, they don't experience it in the same way. They don't. It's not. It's history to them, and
It's
not
history
part
to
of
them. There was a girl yesterday who spoke whose father is Afghan and who fled. And she said that she is very well aware that if her father hadn't done that, you know, well, she wouldn't be alive, but he would have met someone else and it wouldn't be her. But also that girls her age in Afghanistan cannot, go to school, not have the liberty that she has. And it was very, very moving. So although, that history, that felt history through, yeah, people who have, now if you were born in 39, then you're 81. So, it's still, yeah.
yeah,
But it's still amongst us. And as you say, it's also in us, I do feel. But then all those people who are refugees and who come from Syria and Gaza and Afghanistan and Ukraine, they carry it with
yeah,
them.
yes, absolutely.
Well, it
And
is still alive amongst us, but
yes,
just from a
absolutely.
different location.
Yeah. Yes, but I believe there is an epigenetic transfer of that experience.
What does epigenetic transfer mean, Lucy?
Well, I think it means, I say this, but that it actually comes through the experience, or the response to the experience comes through physically in our genes. So I believe there's actually been work done with people with Dutch people who lived through the war and everything you've just described, and their children, their offspring, and maybe even their grandchildren carry in them those responses to those triggers, physically, genetically. They
Yeah.
come down the line. It's not just memories and stories told. It is actually within our bodies that we retain and we pass on these
Yeah.
these fears, which I think is fascinating.
I think it is fascinating how our genes, I've read that too, but I don't know enough about it to really talk about it. But
Yeah,
I can talk about how I was in therapy in my 30s, and the therapist kind of latched on to my mother's time in a camp. My mother was part of colonialism, so she was in Indonesia, where we, the Dutch, had ruled with kind of a minority population over millions. And then the Japanese came and very swiftly put all the Dutch in camps, where the first camps weren't actually camps. They were just people were um, my mother and her mother and her stepfather lived in quite a big house. So that was their first camp. And then it was the street. And then they kind of built barracks and kind of transported them more. And one of the conversations was always, should we move to the next camp or should we stay here? Where is it better? Anyway, we've spoken a lot about feeling different from the family that we were born in, having different values inwardly from, being born like that. So I've always felt different, but I was raised as you were in kind of a coded environment, and codes maybe were stronger when we grew up. Anyway, I was raised in kind of a coded environment, but that code was not my code. And so at age 15, I became depressed and it was difficult. And my parents were very much of kind of, we're going to, after the war, we're going to rebuild and we're going to rebuild society and give our children a wonderful life. And they were giving us a wonderful life. And then I turned out to be utterly unhappy. And but the
very
theory of this,
ungrateful of you.
huh?
How
Very
very
ungrateful of me.
ungrateful of
Yeah,
you.
come on, shape up. Go play a game of tennis and you'll feel fine. Um, but this therapist said, in a prisoner of war camp, everybody has to be the same. You have to kind of toe the line because if you're different, then your head is chopped off, and also there's kind of, danger to everybody. So the idea that we had to be the same was something I felt, the theory is I picked that up from my mother, have to be the same. You have to adapt and be the same and
Yeah,
not be different.
not
And so
cause
I had
danger to yourself or anybody else around you.
absolutely, absolutely. So there's the epigenetic, which is a new word I've learned today. And then there's also kind of the psychology, the internalized psychology of my parents. And when I spoke about this with my mother would not hear of it. She said, this was my war. It wasn't your war. You have nothing to do with it.
Wow.
So that was very off limits. And she felt she'd done a really good job in, landing well and building a new life. But also, of course, she'd closed off a lot.
It must
And
have
you
been
can't
very
just close
traumatic.
off one part of yourself. You close off
How
another part of
interesting.
yourself too.
Because your mother was always so outgoing and energetic and fun and
Yeah,
positive. It's
she
interesting to
was.
know that there was that side
Yeah.
of her as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And also she said, I've been through the worst. Nothing worse can happen to me ever.
no, how interesting. And
And
I,
it made her also a tough cookie. One story she told us at some point, I mean, they all got ill. They had lice, they had, malnutrition, they had dysentery and all the tropical diseases. And she was in the makeshift hospital. And there was a woman next to her. And my mother was kind of feeling sorry for herself. She was born in 1928, so she was 13, 14, maybe 15. And then the woman next to her spoke to her harshly. I said, "Don't pity yourself. There's much worse." And my mother used to say that to us, So we weren't allowed to feel a lot. We were allowed to feel happy, but, but that was about it.
yes, how interesting. I mean, I suppose the different war experiences have also shaped the society of our two different countries as well, because we came out of the war feeling hard working and heroic and that we
Victorious.
but victorious. Yes, we had suffered, we had sacrificed, but we were going to build a new society, and certainly the whole literally the kind of shape of London, as we were saying, the rebuilding, it all had a very positive spin on it. I think my generation certainly felt that we were going into a new land, a kind of a new place, a new society. We were going to build something different, and that's why the kind of hippie 60s movement of peace and love, make love not war. We were absolutely in opposition. I mean, not disrespecting what had been before, but not wanting to be anything like that generation of. I mean, we didn't really. I don't think we really thought in terms of sacrifice anymore. We wanted to build a comfortable, enjoyable, educated life and not ever go back into that situation.
Well,
And
that's very similar here. I think the generation of my parents, oops, the generation, this is my nephew calling, which is lovely, and I'll call him back later. The generation of my parents wanted to rebuild society too and say, the beast of fascism fed on poverty and lack of education. So we need to make sure we have a society where everybody can have access to an education and have a decent life and have decent houses and hygiene and all of
yeah,
that. There was an enormous push.
yes, even though there was no money and there was the Marshall Plan, we had to borrow money from the Americans, as I understand it. I mean, what came out of the war for the UK was the National Health Service, social care, sort of the benefit system, as we now call it, massive house building. I think 1 million houses were built in the decade after the war. And as you say, education, free university education eventually. And that, I suppose that's where I came in, and that's that's what I see. That's where my values lie. That's where I think everybody ought to have that still, and it's now become impossible.
Mm,
because of
yeah.
well, because. So yes, interesting. But I wonder whether, I mean, we were still, although the war kind of did produce the kind of idea in the UK that a lot of the army were lions led by donkeys. So
Lions led by donkeys.
more
Okay.
thing. I'm not even sure about that, but that the upper classes had not always done the best by their working class, troops that they were leading, and I think that
So the troops were working class, and then the officers were upper class,
sort
and they
of,
were
yes,
there
yes,
for their name and not necessarily for their capacity. Was
yes,
that the
yes,
idea?
exactly, exactly. So
We never had a society
no,
like that. I mean, that was never the case here. Yeah.
no. Oh, was there a Dutch army in?
Well, there was a Dutch army. I didn't know where it went. Yeah, I mean, there was a fight over Arnhem.
Yes,
We did put up a fight, but no, it was a surprise attack. I think there was a Dutch army because my father's father, was in the army, but he had already died before the war started. Um, yeah, no, there was a Dutch army.
yeah,
It wasn't very effective.
no, no. No, interesting. But I kind of wonder whether something about your situation in the war, as opposed to ours, led the Netherlands to have a more equitable, socially fair society. I mean, I guess that was already built into the class system pre-war anyway, and that continued. But whether there was
Yeah.
something about the experience of having been occupied that gave a softer feel in a way to Dutch society.
I don't know.
No, I don't.
I don't know about that. I have not enough historical or sociological insight. And I think as from the 60s, well, 80s at least, when kind of the finance system took over and the business of business is business. And so there were also very different views of, I think as in every country, there's the view that, business can do everything better than
Yeah,
government. And there's the view that, government, although it becomes bureaucratic and slow, is also fairer because business looks for profit and then
exactly.
things need to be cheap and then they economize on things that the government would provide, like this bus to a small place where nobody catches the bus until a person catches the bus. And now it's no longer there because of economizing. So I think there's always this, yeah, who has, you know,
Yeah,
power
I
there.
suppose straight after the war, especially here, there was definitely the feeling that government had to step in and do it and make things happen
Yeah.
and build a new society. And that's why, we got the NHS, we got social security, we got education, we got transport, as you say, as well. The trains were nationalized. Lots of things were nationalized. British Steel was nationalized. Industry
Yeah.
was nationalized. And I suppose, as I said, that's kind of where unconsciously that's where I stem from. That's what was happening when I was young, and I'm sure I've internalized that. And I have less. I mean, I do have faith in business. Obviously, I do business. I
You
have,
do.
but I still have faith in the necessity for the fairness of government stepping in.
I think that's interesting because my father was a businessman and very much believed, that business could elevate people and produce things and provide jobs and meaningful work and, well, work and income. And so that was very much in our household. That was the thing. The economy must do well because then everybody will thrive. And yeah, I'm somewhere in between, or maybe a bit, yeah, both, not in between, because yeah, there's a role for business, but there's really truly also a role for government and for these endless conversations about, that integrate various opinions and not just the efficiency drive or the profit drive.
No, no, exactly. And I mean, I totally believe that. And of course, business has a role, a huge role. And, it is in many ways the generator of creativity and the economy. And yet I do find when I hear younger entrepreneurs saying how rubbish government is at this, that, or the other, and everything should, come out of government. And I do find my hackles rising. And I think it's a kind of instinctive um, response to where things were when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, there's government and then there's politics. I mean, how do we speak with one another and how do we integrate very different perspectives? I once wrote an article with a friend and said, you know, pol pol the well, you have the two parties, right?
Most well, that's in we've just had a set of elections where that's kind of somewhat been thrown up into the air. But yes, in general, and for the
But
last.
even that building is like, I say yes, you say no.
Yes,
You know, we're all against one another. So we
yeah,
pleaded for a circular building. So people would sit in circle and say, together we have a 360 view. And so we bring into the middle, the people we represent and how they view life and what their circumstances are. And then the others bring that into the middle. And then in the middle, you can come to kind of an overview and say, okay, knowing we probably can't make everybody happy, this is the best we can do, integrating all those views and wishes and circumstances.
yes, yes, no, absolutely. I do think the actual physical formation, the physical functions of government are a kind of created at that level in some way, and ours is very definitely adversarial. And as you say,
Yeah.
sets of benches in the House of Commons on either side for the government and the opposition. And then we've got the House of Lords, which is separate. And I know it's not just full of, kind of hereditary aristocrats anymore, although, there are quite a lot of them still left and they need to go. But it's, people who are not elected and, again, and they sit on red benches while the commoners in the House of Commons sit on green benches and the House of Lords. The lords wear red cloaks and ermine and have to be introduced into the House of Lords by well, actually, it used to be by my father, who was Garter King of Arms, and his
Uh,
absolutely. I mean, introducing into the House of Lords is a whole ceremony in itself, and just the whole archaicness of that. And we have a character called Black Rod, who dresses in black breeches and knocks on the doors of the House of Lords to have them opened. And yes, it's all kind of mad,
well,
really.
I give it to you that you know how to do good parades and you know how to keep these traditions intact and these names and these things we feel silly, but that also bring a certain weight to things. We have like Parliament is the first chamber and the second chamber, and the second chamber kind of makes the laws, and then they go to the first chamber. And there, a friend of mine was in there for, I don't know, 12 years or so. And he wrote a book about democracy and how he perceives it and what the virtues are that you need to practice. And one of the stories he tells that is he comes, it's all in The Hague, and he kind of walks around and is in this shopping street, which is around the corner from where the Houses of Parliament are. And and then he says, I am a representative, not so much of my party, I'm a representative of the people. Have I, in this debate, in this exchange of thought, truly represented the people? And who are they? How can I know? Because everybody who says, I am the people, I know the people, I'm for the people, kind of really, do you know everybody? And have you really integrated all of that? But I thought it was a beautiful thought to be mindful. You're not there for a constituency, you're not there for even for your party, although that will give you a certain view, but you're there to represent the whole.
Yeah, I think certainly in the sort of two-party politics we have here, that there is always a tension between MPs, members of parliament who represent a geographical area and the people in it, and the party they belong to. And, sometimes the people in their geographical area do not want what the party wants, but to stay in the party that they were elected for, the MPs have to go with the party. It's called whipping, strangely.
Yeah.
So they get whipped into the party.
Yeah, the chief whip kind of,
Whip,
yeah,
exactly. And there's
it's
a
kind
one
of the
line.
herd,
Yes, exactly.
herding everybody in.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So it is a strange system, and I'm quite sure that if you were starting from scratch, you wouldn't do it like that. But yes, you have a much nicer sort of physicality, I think, to your parliament.
yeah, but
Nothing's perfect.
nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. And I tend to think it was nicer than it was. I feel there is lack of knowledge in our government. There is lack of manners in the way that there's being spoken. Some things get very personal, and there is threats, and there is, yeah, it's not particularly nice there at the moment.
No, it's not a job I would want to do.
Well, I would not be suited for it at all,
No,
at all.
no, me neither. And I do admire people who do it, because I think it's really tough. I think people think that, members of parliament just sit in the House of Commons when they feel like it and have debates and things. But actually, they have an incredibly pressured life, and their constituency takes up a lot of their time. They're mostly working weekends, and also having to do things like open fates and, go and visit building sites and,
Yes, and you have to
doctors.
you have to have insight in lots and lots of different topics. Of course, they all have their niche, but you have to have insights in lots of topics. So that's where we came to from the war.
Yes,
Then
how did we get to there?
Victory Day and Liberation Day.
Yes. So what's happening in Holland today, in the Netherlands?
Yeah, so there's in the park, but it's rather cold today, but there's in the park, there's like a children's, there's a free market, and there's concerts, and there's a free liberation meal. People make soup, and you can come and attend. And it's great if you bring some bread or a salad. And then yesterday I was visiting a friend who lives on the Amstel, which is the river that flows through Amsterdam. And the dam in the Amstel is, of course, what gave this city its name. And just across the street from him is Carré, which used to be a circus, was built as a circus, and it is a square theater. And they had built on the river. There is a places for people to sit. So for the order, the king and the queen will attend, and there will be a concert, and everybody will be really, really cold. But they were already doing rehearsals yesterday. So yeah, and it is a holiday, and it is so. Yesterday, our flag, the red, white, and blue, was put half down as a sign of grief.
Yes,
And today it's, back
up, up,
up
full
and
height. Yeah,
yeah.
yes. No, it's interesting that we both countries also have monarchs, have actual
Yeah.
royal families,
Yeah.
but we have very different styles. I think for our royal families, yours are quite laid back and of the people more, while ours are very kind of paradey. They're very performative, and
Yeah.
they will take part in lots of ceremonies today, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think also, I mean, you've had one monarch who has done her thing for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And now Charles, of course, is finding his own way.
Yeah.
And in my lifetime, we had I think we still had Wilhelmina. It's actually rather strange that our government and our royal family fled. The moment the Germans came in, they fled. So it's not like Zelensky who said, I'm going to stay put, I'm going to be here, I'm going to, we govern from here, we're here.
Yeah.
Because the government fled to London and the royal family fled to Canada.
Oh,
And so we've had Wilhelmina, and then her daughter Juliana, and then her daughter Beatrix, and now her son Willem Alexander, who is married to Argentinian Maxima, and Maxima has really, lifted the whole thing up, and she's a wonderful woman who also still works with UN committees, and I think they're both highly, highly professional,
yes. Well,
highly professional people.
that's yes, that's wonderful. Well, I mean, our royal family in the war stayed in London, stayed in Buckingham Palace against all the advice of, government officials who wanted them to move out to
Yeah.
other many palaces elsewhere. And the Queen, our then Queen Elizabeth, worked as an ambulance driver in the Blitz, I believe. And she and her sister Princess Margaret slipped out of the palace on VE Day, and joined in the
Wow.
street celebrations, and nobody recognised them. At least that's
Yeah.
the story. So yeah, they
Wow.
really kind of
Yeah. I
stand.
think it was a bit of a painful moment when the royal family came back and, said, I mean, I would have said, like, okay, now what? You're back?
Yeah,
Huh?
yes.
Yeah.
Where do you think you've been?
They were kind of, I think, whisked away, but they did it. And
Yeah, difficult decision. Yeah,
yeah, difficult.
but I do think actually the death of our Queen does represent that kind of end of contact with the Second World War. She
Yeah,
was
yeah.
part of the Second World War. She took things forward. Her legacy is massive in terms of, bringing the UK forward into a new generation post-war. And now she has gone. That really is the end of an era, and it is the end of that's what we call the silent generation. It,
Silent generation. Yes, of course. There's also a difference in system there because a former Queen Beatrix is still alive. She abdicated.
right. Yes.
She said it's time. So our Willem Alexander hasn't had to wait for decades as your King Charles has had to do. Yeah,
Well, goodness me.
what a tour
The
on your
tour.
V-Day and our Liberation Day.
Yeah,
And let's celebrate,
yeah, yeah,
heroism, bravery, to
yeah,
stand against tyranny and oppression and thinking that whoever is different ought to be banished or not exist.
yeah, yeah. That
Let's
is the
welcome
underlying message.
diversity and really, really celebrate that, we can think what we think, we can say mostly what we think, and we can
Yeah,
walk the streets. And as one of the girls said yesterday, it's in the evenings, there's light. I can read, I can study, I can call my friends, all of that.
yeah, yeah. And
Start
it's
of peace.
all thanks to those amazing people who worked at home and abroad during the war. So yes,
Hmm.
celebrate them.
See you
And
next week.
see you next week.